Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 99. No, we're not talking. It's not Wayne Gretzky, but no, it's Sean Mitsui. He is with the Grassroots Institute in Hawaii, and we're going to talk about what's been going on in Hawaii recently, specifically the fires. We might also talk about some of the COVID stuff that's happened with Hawaii recently, and just the overall political situation in Hawaii, which generally isn't that good. How are you, Sean?
Good, Chris. Thanks for having me on your program. It's good to see you again.
Thank you for coming on. This is a hot issue. In more ways than one, I guess it's a hot issue, but
yeah,
and certainly been on people's minds. But these fires that are taking place currently on the island of Maui. What can you tell me? Is this a fairly frequent occurrence? Because Hawaii is generally a pretty humid place. So why would there be? How often does Hawaii have some wildfires like this? I don't ever remember hearing about wildfires other than, of course, the volcanoes erupting, and that certainly causes a lot of havoc. But how often does something like this happen in Hawaii?
Yeah, let me back up a little bit and explain about Hawaii first of all.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
So I work for the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, which is Hawaii's only free market think tank. I'm the finance director, so I oversee the finance and fundraising department. So being in my position, I hear a lot of different things, and we're pretty much at the center of a lot of the things that take place, and we're frequently the only voice when it comes to just the alternative perspective here, because Hawaii is very singular, and it's in the sort of consensus or any on thoughts, basically, because Hawaii is pretty much a one-party Democratic blue state where there's only, I believe, 5 Republicans in total in the state house, and there's only 1 in the state Senate. And you can argue if those are actually true Republicans that are in there, but there really isn't much competition of ideas, and because it's a Democratic state, but also the unions have a lot of control, so that's not a really healthy environment. And when it comes down to the fires, so Hawaii, it's really easy to think of it as like this tropical, wet, paradise, but every island is very unique. Oahu, where we are, that's the main island where the capital of Honolulu is. We tend to be a little bit more humid, a little bit more wet. But when you go to like the Big Island, it's kind of split into 2, where the west side is pretty dry, where there's a lot of volcanic rocks, and the east side is a little bit more wet. But Kauai is known to be the Garden Island. It's very wet, but Maui is actually known to be quite dry, relatively speaking. So this isn't a new thing, and people have been sounding the alarm. And my boss, who used to live on Maui and work there for many years, he recounts that there are a lot of brush fires, and at the time it seemed like they actually employed mitigation tactics, such as using controlled burns to make sure the fire doesn't go too crazy. And I'm not sure if they've stopped those practices, but it's not a new thing. And so Maui is notorious for being very, very dry, and it's become drier because a lot of the old sugarcane lands that have become unprofitable to grow sugarcane. You can make the case that it's because of failed government policies that those lands are just lying fallow. And whenever somebody wants to do with it, you have to contend with the environmentalists and with government agencies. So a lot of those lands are very, very dry. So it's pretty much a big tinderbox. But especially on the west side of Maui, that was the case, and there were a lot of people sounding the alarm. I know this one person who wanted to have another fire station there. Actually, there were there was, I think, like only one fire station, and then when they made another fire station, the insurance rates went down. So, but he was making the case to have another fire station there. But in any case, that kind of shows you like just how prevalent this problem was. And unfortunately, last month, it seemed like everything that could have gone wrong did in fact go wrong, and it resulted in this major catastrophe.
Yes, and I'm looking at this. The current makeup. The Senate has 25 members, and they're 2 red, and the House has 51, and they're 6. So, as yes, it basically is a one-party state, and it
Yeah.
sounds like it's been this way for a long time. I know Jimmy Carter won Hawaii in 1980, and he didn't win very many states. So, yeah, so definitely the case.
Yeah,
So
and
Maui
I think
is
the last time that a Republican won Hawaii was Reagan, possibly.
Reagan in
Yeah,
'84. Yeah,
sorry.
that was such a landslide. Yeah, that was a. Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, Reagan. Yeah, in '84 was a. When you've got the legislature that's skewed, it doesn't really. You don't even get other voices. It really is one, and that means the state tends to even get even worse. It just the socialists become more socialist because they get bolder because they don't have any competition. It's
yeah, and imagine what that means for, in this case, the electric provider. We have a monopoly electric provider known as the Hawaiian Electric Company, and they don't face any competition at all. So one could make the case that possibly that this crisis could have been averted if HECO, Hawaiian Electric, had a little bit more competition to respond against these red flags.
the electric company were these fires started by faulty electrical systems or what? Do
Oh,
we know?
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of noise, but I think it's pretty safe to say that the fires did start from a dangling electrical line. I mean, there were
Oh,
a couple of people documenting, you know, uh, live streaming that there was this dangling electric wire which ignited the dry shrubs underneath. So I think that case is pretty clear. Um, but yeah, but it's always been the case. People have been saying like, "Oh, we need to do something about the dry shrubs," around the power grid.
yeah, I've personally seen that happen. I saw a wire snap, and what happens when the wire snaps, they start the wire starts moving around, and it's like shooting out fireworks. It looks like
Right.
fireworks, and it's a very dangerous situation. I could certainly see why if that hit something, it would eventually cause a fire. And I remember it happened by the house where I was living, and somebody actually did call the fire department. The fire department, it wasn't something for them, but it was like, yeah, there's a. And eventually, what happened was, I think somehow maybe either it shorted something out, or maybe the electric company shut off the circuit because they had to do something to tame this wire, and so it wouldn't cause any danger. But yeah, that's definitely an issue. So, as you said, Maui is dry. So, and what other policies you've talked about? Some of the plant life here could have also caused part of the issue. What particular plant life is there on
Mm.
Maui?
Plant life, I'm not really sure, but I mean, in terms of what else that went wrong, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean the
Well, first of all,
contributing
the
factors,
electric,
because we put the electricity, but obviously
yeah,
you have something that's dry or it won't ignite.
right. I mean, so right now there's a lot of finger pointing going on right now.
Yeah,
So because nobody wants to, of course, be liable, right? So um, the electric company isn't claiming responsibility. They said that I believe they said that they shut off the power lines at that time because of some protocol. I'm a little bit fuzzy on that detail, but they're not claiming responsibility. Um, the siren was supposed to go off, but the agency that manages the county agency that manages the siren said that, oh, actually, we typically don't use it for wildfires, which is not the case. If you look on their website, it clearly says wildfires. but he was saying that it's only for tsunami warnings. And he said that if they sounded the sirens, then people might have rushed up to where the fire was, was rampantly, burning on the north side, which I don't know, seems like a very stupid excuse. Um, so,
Yeah.
and the governor's blaming it on climate change. So that's
Well,
that's the
yeah,
situation right now.
and the people are probably going to be able to tell, the difference between a fire and a tsunami. I mean, obviously you will behave differently because in a tsunami you would want to get to higher ground, but in a fire situation, you're like this, your best strategy might be to go down to the beach and get in the water.
That's true. That's true. And that's what a lot of people ended up doing. Yeah, but I mean, like, they could have at least sounded the alarm, right?
Yeah.
But that's what I mean when like everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, but nobody's claiming
Yeah.
responsibility. And kind of understandably, because this is a huge liability. I mean, you're talking about billions in property damage, and the human toll, as well. So there's a lot of lawsuits right now against the electric company. I think there's a couple of lawsuits against the county as well. But at the end of the day, it's not the politicians, it's not the heads of the electric company that's going to be paying out the claims, right? It's either going to be the taxpayers or the ratepayers, right? So, but it's still a huge liability issue. So there's a lot of finger pointing going on right now, and even about like the uh, the water situation as well, because another monopoly that exists is the Public Utilities Commission, which sets the rate on utilities such as water. So they make it notoriously difficult for market participants to come in and provide water at the market rate. But because of that, it's really hard for, well, there's a private water company there that wants that's having a hard time doing business because they can't charge what the for what the company would be willing to bear. And but there's a case to be made about, if there was a more uh, if this was an actual, you know uh, if there was more competition, if these companies were allowed to charge what the market would have buried, then there might have been more water to go around to extinguish the fires. That's all kind of speculative at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah. I've also heard that the water got held up too. Yeah, you said that the water got held up. Yeah, I'm looking.
Yeah,
Yeah, the current population
that
of Maui is just Maui is 168,307. So
yeah, it's a pretty small island,
yeah, yeah,
but it's a pretty big island
yeah, it's a big island. I
geographically.
mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, most of the people, a lot of the people in Hawaii live in Honolulu, and that's on Oahu. But
Yeah,
Oahu has a natural harbor, so that's one reason why it became the port city where it is. I mean, even though it's smaller than Maui and it's smaller than the island of Hawaii, or as they call it, the Big Island. It's yeah,
right. And I guess we're quite shielded from a lot of these, you know, the natural elements. The Big Island gets hurricanes. Maui's dry, so they get wildfires, but Oahu is relatively unscathed. Although we do have some couple of wildfires, brush fires, in the more suburban side. So it's not totally foreign to us.
yeah. So it's just the geography. I mean, apparently there must be some natural rain shadows around Maui, which is why Maui is the drier of the islands. But because
Yeah,
that's all
I think it's
because
got a lot
mountains
to do with
can
the
block
trade
out the
winds.
rain. Yeah. What?
I think it's got a lot to do with the trade winds. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, the trade
Yeah,
winds. Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, how the wind currents. Yeah, where the winds blow the clouds. I mean, it's probably so. It's very interesting. That's interesting, dear. Just here's to just see the differences. In the islands. obviously life on the Big Island is different from life in Oahu or life in Maui. So the trade winds make Maui drier. So
Right.
had it been really dry this year on Maui and or drier than usual, or was it just a fairly typical summer?
I'm not really sure about that. I think it has been a little bit drier than usual. Yeah, maybe there is something to this climate change, global warming thing.
Well, sometimes there's a lot of factors, that go into why
Yeah,
you have client. I mean, it could all, another thing that's contributing to some cases can, climate is always changing. It's just a matter of, what's causing it. There's, uh, one problem in some
right.
places, is just the increase of deserts. I mean, if you have more deserts, you're going to have that can severely impact the weather. You're much better off having lots of water and lots of plant life if you can have it, because plant life you need a certain amount of carbon dioxide in the air.
Right. And Hawaii, we, like I said, I mean, there's the if you want to do something, you get a lot of protests, and the prevailing thought is, we need to protect our land, we need to protect the environment, we need to promote more agriculture, which there's good intentions there, and I mean, I certainly love the nature, and I love hiking and going to the beach from time to time, so we definitely want to preserve the natural beauty of Hawaii, but because that position has been very, very strong, as a result, like on Oahu, only 5% of the lands here are zoned for housing purposes. I mean, when you're in Honolulu, in urban Honolulu, it might not seem that way, but there's a lot of untapped land that are zoned for agricultural purposes.
Yes.
But because it's so expensive to to live and to do business here, partly because of the artificial scarcity of land, um, people can't do agriculture. So there's a lot of land that's supposed to be used for agriculture that can't be because it's economically unfeasible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you look at our yeah, when you look at our economy, like we really don't export that much stuff besides coffee. We don't do sugarcane anymore, right? But because are at an we have this disadvantage that we've placed on ourselves because of these drastic policies.
Yeah. It seems like Hawaii would be a natural producer of sugar, for example. That seems like a logical. And as you pointed out, coffee. I don't know what other. And obviously, there's one crop that other people. I don't know if there anybody growing any marijuana there. Uh, that would probably marijuana apparently does well anywhere. So that's another thing. But it sounds like you have this artificial
Sure.
scarcity of land. I mean, because as far as I know, Honolulu is one of the most expensive large city in America, isn't it? I mean, I don't think they're. I mean, it's even more expensive than California and places like that. Is that right?
For sure it is. Yeah,
Yeah. So as a result,
I
who
think we're
who
like
does
definitely
live
like in the top 5 in the
who
nation.
who does live in Hawaii then? I mean, what's the general demographic of
Um,
Hawaiian? Is it just a really rich people who are retired, or what is it? Because
well, you do
because when
have a
it's
lot
that
of rich people
expensive,
who
it makes a
retire,
lot.
but also, yeah, I mean, that's but because it's so expensive,
Yeah,
you see people who are my age who still live with their parents, right?
yeah,
Who can't afford to make it up. I'm fortunate enough, so I live in a studio in
yeah,
Waikiki in the tourist district, but a lot of people they can't afford that, so they either live with their parents, live with their significant other, or you know they have a bunch of roommates and they try to make it work. So yeah, it's really tough, and plus the job market isn't really good here.
I mean, you probably either work for the government or you work for tourism, in one way or another.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So it's funny you say that because well, I go to church every Sunday, and it seems like all of my friends either work for the government for the schools, which I guess is the government, and healthcare, which is kind of like the
Okay,
government
healthcare, yeah,
industry at
yeah,
this point. Yeah. So it's like,
and yeah,
where's, like, yeah, it's like, where's the private sector, right?
yeah, and well,
Nobody really
and
works for a
tourism that
purely private company.
of course
Yeah.
includes the hotels, the resorts,
Right.
people who may take you scuba diving, or people who might take you on little trips or excursions. But yeah, it's very interesting. And you've also got a little bit of Navy there, of course. You got a military base there too. I did know a guy who was I know a guy who was
Yes.
stationed in Hawaii for a while. He loved being that probably not a bad deal if you're in the military, because at least that way your expenses are taken care of. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely not.
Biggest industries are tourism and the military. Yeah, that's what they say.
And the problem, and the problem when you have a place that's gotten so expensive and you have these artificially inflated real estate prices, there's now an incentive. There's such a disincentive to remove these regulations and stuff that have kept real estate high, because I don't want to buy a house for $1 million and then have that house be $200,000 in 5 years. Nobody does.
That's true.
I mean, everybody's it's it's one of those things. I don't know how you get out of it once you're in it. I mean, other than
Yeah. If we want housing affordability, that means people who currently own homes, they're,
yeah,
you know, what's in it for them, right? They eventually want to sell their homes.
yeah, you sell your homes, and it also, and I've also heard there's also just a lot of people in Hawaii that just live on the beach, or maybe go out and live in the live off the land, so to speak. They're literally what you'd call almost rainforest people or jungle people.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of them. Yeah.
And
But it's really
being
hard if you don't know anyone.
and but being an island like that, it's probably not too tough, and certainly there's plenty of fruit to pick off the trees and stuff like that. I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean, they say that the other states ship their homeless population to Hawaii, right? I personally haven't verified that. I think there is some truth to it. Um, but it's not a bad place to live. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
compared to like freezing in the cold in New York in the winter. I mean, Hawaii, we have a pretty stable climate temperature throughout the year, so there's no better place to be homeless.
and so now I'm hearing about some other regulations that are coming down, like that are going to make it harder for these people to rebuild once it's over. Are the how are what's the current state of the fires right now? Is it pretty much fought, or is that
The fires, yes, is extinguished, but yeah, you're
yeah,
right. I mean, it is an uphill battle to rebuild because as it stands right now, the homes where the lands where those homes were are
yes,
not even zoned properly, meaning that they were when the zoning laws took effect many decades ago, those properties were naturally grandfathered in. So I'm not sure what the current designation is, but as it stands right now, you can't even build homes right there, over there right now.
so
I
if
mean,
I built
hopefully people will understand. Yeah.
so basically, if I had a house that, we'll say, had a green chimney, and then they pass a law saying you can't build houses with green chimneys, and then my house burns down, I can't go back and it was fine. It got grandfathered in, but then I can't rebuild my house with the green chimney. Basically, I mean,
Or you just can't build your house in, in
yeah.
general.
So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just using that as an example with green. Why would you have a green chimney? I don't know, but it's
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty crazy. I mean, hopefully people and politicians would understand, you know, um, why we need zoning reform, at least for this area of the island. But I have a feeling that it will still be a very contentious issue because the
so
governor, I don't think he's talking about this now, but he was talking about, using eminent domain to buy up all the land in that area to build like a state memorial.
Oh,
So
jeez.
yeah, which I don't think he's talking about now. I think we've kind of diffused the situation when it comes to that.
Yeah, it sounds like a real mess. So it sounds like it could be a long time before these people get paid off. I don't know if, and I don't know what kind of other regulations are. You said talking about no competition among the house. So apparently, a lot of these law regulations and zoning stuff comes down from the state. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah,
Yeah,
but the county also has a lot of egregious regulations as well.
yeah.
Uh, the state land use commission is the biggest culprit in the whole zoning scheme, and that does a real number when it comes to, you know, I think it was established back in, I like to say, in the 70s, and ever since then you've seen a drastic drop in the amount of properties that are being developed, and the excuse is that we need sustainable development, we need to be mindful of the environment. So you can make the case that that's a good intention, but that um, sets up artificial barriers and makes it really unaffordable for people to live in Hawaii.
Yes, it sounds like it does make it unaffordable. And there are 5 counties in Hawaii. So what you're saying though is really there's no competition among the counties. For example, they're like say Kauai County doesn't say, "Hey, we want to be the cheap county in Hawaii so we can get more people to live here." They're all kind. It's all basically the state basically forces every place to be expensive.
Um, yeah, I wish there's competition. I mean, there are differences among the counties, but they're all bad. It's just a matter of like
Yes.
which one's worse. So I'd say like Maui is pretty bad when it comes to housing issues. They have a lot more egregious, quote unquote, affordable housing requirements where if a developer were to build like an apartment, they need to set aside a certain percentage. I think it's like 50%. Might be a little bit wrong about that. Um, but yeah, I'm sure your listeners will understand the unintended consequences of policies like that. So I'd say they're all pretty bad, but some counties are worse than the other. Um, but but I think people are somewhat starting to understand that like we can't keep on with the status quo. So we've actually been successful with we have a pretty good working relationship with the governor, who's obviously a Democrat, on the importance of of kind of loosening some of these regulations, and some of the more recent proposals that he's come forth does echo our concerns and sentiments, as opposed to if we didn't talk to him, I'm sure he would have talked about put a typical scapegoat, like, we need to, the typical scapegoat is, foreign buyers buying up everything, therefore we need more regulations in place. As tempting as that was, he said that there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of red tape, and we need to cut through that. So that maybe there's a glimmer of hope there for people to understand that, okay, like the problem is the problem is the are these onerous regulations, and it's not exactly because there's an influx of foreign buyers buying up every single property. There's always going to be some people, but we should have an abundance of housing. We should have an abundance of properties. So people, we should make Hawaii a more attractive place. I think that's my personal opinion. But too often, I mean, our leaders, quote unquote, they just want to scapegoat and diffuse the blame from themselves, but they don't realize just how a lot of the issues that we see today is because of many decades of backwards policies that were implemented.
It seems like it's somewhat of a variation on the you'll own nothing and be happy, because in this case you end up with a situation where nobody goes out and buys a house, but everybody just lives in little apartments inside a building. So I mean, so it's safe to say that Hawaii is probably very much a tenant population and not a homeowner population. Is that correct, or what's the percentage there? Do you know?
Um, I'm sorry, I don't
Home
have that
ownership
figure off the top of
versus
my head.
renters.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm not sure about that. Yeah, but I can say that it's hard to own homes. When the medium price of a home is over $1 million, right? So many people choose to either rent or they room with other people.
But even in a place like Hawaii, the rents are going to be high because yeah, be you
That's
know,
true.
yeah, yeah, and of course the hotels are going to be high, and I mean, and that's another thing too. The hotels are going to want to keep it. I wonder, is it easy or hard to do an Airbnb there? I suspect it's hard.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot of red tape regulations. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah, and
hotel lobby is pretty strong here, so
I can imagine it would be huge. And of course, in a place like Hawaii, it would probably. I mean, they obviously want to keep everybody in the hotels where they're and you can certainly have a variation on hotels, but it's yeah, Airbnbs actually don't look like they're too bad in Hawaii, but there's a lot
yeah,
of
we
people doing
gotta.
Airbnb. Yeah,
I mean, we do have a lot of people,
yeah,
and a lot of people do rely it as their source of income, but
yeah,
that's another example where it's so easy to blame the short-term vacation rental, Airbnb market, um, and so that's the first thing that politicians would typically tax and regulate
yeah.
when they
They
don't
want to
understand
regulate
that
it.
it is a very big industry. I think that brings in over $1 billion into the local economy every single year. So that gives you some perspective as to how big it is.
I suspect also that the hotel taxes in Hawaii are out of this world because I used to work as a hotel receptionist and I realize it's kind of the perfect tax because the state puts the tax on travelers, so it's people who because most of the people who are paying hotel taxes in Hawaii don't live there, so you're getting money into the state's coffers
Right,
from people who are visiting the state and they can't vote no on it because the people who live in Hawaii aren't going to
right.
stay in hotels. Yeah, because
Yeah, and that's called the transient accommodation tax,
yes,
which I forgot when exactly it was established, but the original excuse that they used it to create the convention center here in Honolulu, and
yes,
they were saying that it was going to go away, but it hasn't, obviously. And when Honolulu was, when the rail system was proposed, the notorious, infamous rail system, which is the most costly one in the entire world when you
yes,
account it for a per capita basis, they've added a surcharge to the transient accommodation tax. So that's um, yeah, so it's an easy tax to increase, right? Because it's easy to push the cost onto foreigners, tourists that people typically don't like, but they don't understand just how reliant we are on these visitors.
yes. And the taxes, I mean, the overall hotel tax in Hawaii is about 17 or 18%. So if I
Oh, is
have a
that
room,
high? Yeah,
so if I have a
that
room
sounds
that's
about right.
$100 a night, I'm going to be paying $17 or $18 extra in taxes. I mean, that's just out of this world. That's not unusual, but it's also, but it's already, and Hawaii already has some disadvantages because it's just so far from everywhere. I mean, you've already got to pay a lot of money just to get there because you're five
That's a
hours
good
from
point.
California by plane, and I don't think any place is really any place is closer to Hawaii. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and consumers are price sensitive.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm ethnically Japanese. Um, I used to live in Japan for 5 years, and every year I would come back to Hawaii to visit my family and relatives, friends. But I think there were more people from Japan visiting Hawaii before um, during COVID times, but now it seems like there's less, and obviously the exchange rate has to factor has you know is a part of that. The yen is really weak right now, so Japanese people are very price sensitive. So I'm sure they settle for a different place or just travel within their own country.
Yes, and they for example they moved the
But
Pro Bowl out of Hawaii. That was
consumers,
one of them.
travelers,
Yeah. But I was saying, for
right,
example,
right.
they moved the NFL Pro Bowl out of Hawaii. That was the All-Star game for football players, and I suppose the expense had something to do with that too. It's you're not going it because you get people who go there to go to the beach, but you're not going to get, for example, people who go there. You're not going to get any conference business there. Uh, I won't mention names that you probably know a guy that I know, and he was actually talking about having a Bitcoin conference in Hawaii, and I was just like, "Are you crazy? Why would you do it there?" And
That's true. We don't have a nice convention space. I mean, the
yeah,
convention center which we have is a little bit removed from the hotel facilities, so it's not the most convenient. I was in a convention conference last week in Chicago, and they have so much more conference spaces that are much more convenient and accommodating, right? So it's like, why would you think the
yeah.
default would be Hawaii just because we have nice temperature, nice climate here?
But
But the
I can
convention center is
imagine,
a big
yeah,
white elephant.
I can imagine also though that it's probably not a very easy place to get people to do construction work or to do plumbing or to do anything like that. It's probably not a place that they really want to. I mean, I mean, if the plumber has a choice of taking a job in Hawaii or taking a job in Texas, he's probably going to take the job in Texas. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just
I'm not
because of
sure.
the
Well,
expense.
yeah, I mean, we can talk all day long about all the missed opportunities,
Yeah,
here in Hawaii, but there's a lot of opportunities as well. It's a
yeah,
relatively small state, but it's a pretty like Honolulu is a pretty dense, area.
yeah.
As a result, I think we have the number one cheesecake factory. We have the number one, in terms of sales, number
Oh
one
wow.
Costco in the nation. We have the number one Panda Express. So that
Yes.
comes to show like just how much opportunity there is here in Hawaii, especially in Honolulu. Um, but yeah, oftentimes we kind of hold ourselves back, so to speak.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be opportunities there. I assume you must have a pretty good fishing industry there too, right?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, a lot of people do eat fish, but are you talking about in terms of exporting or?
Or just fish for people like
Oh yeah,
maybe
yeah, for
maybe you
sure.
wouldn't export the fish, but another thing too is got to talk about this. Every
Yes,
time something happens in Hawaii or Puerto Rico or wherever, I always hear about let's talk about the Jones Act.
yes, the
Uh,
Jones Act.
how it tell for people out there who may not know, tell us what the Jones Act is and how does that affect Hawaii and other places like Puerto Rico or mostly the islands.
Guam, yeah, yeah, all these non-contiguous areas of the United States. So the Jones Act is a over century-year-old law, federal law that is a remnant of the First World War, where the intention was to it's this cabotage shipping law that where the intention was to protect domestic the domestic shipping industry. So as a result, any ships going between two U.S. ports needs to be crewed by Americans over a certain percentage, owned by a U.S. company, flagged, the United States flag, and there's so many other regulations, and you know, sounds well intentioned, but as a result, it's totally decimated our shipping industry. We don't have any shipyards that build ships anymore, and you know, the military has their own ships being repaired in other countries because our domestic shipping ports can't even keep up with the demand. So Jones Act ships are very costly. They're outdated, inefficient, smaller. So yeah, and as a result, and because Hawaii is so economically disadvantaged, we don't export anything. A lot of ships, we're kind of like a second afterthought for a lot of these
Yes.
ships that come here. So yeah, there isn't much trade going on, and it artificially increases the prices of a lot of different things. When there was a hurricane, I forgot which hurricane it was that hit, Guam or Puerto Rico. Every single time there's a hurricane, the president needs to waive the Jones Act temporarily, so that that region could receive aid from other countries, from other states.
Yes.
For essential supplies and oil and things like that. So that comes to show just how backwards the policy is, right? We might have just waived the Jones Act entirely.
Yeah. So basically, if Toyota and Honda build some cars in Japan, they have to ship them to LA and then ship them to Hawaii on an American ship, I believe is what the deal is, instead of just shipping them directly to Hawaii. And this was actually, was something similar to this that inspired the revolution in the first place. Because I mean, we were under something similar, with trading with England. I mean, the colonies, for example, couldn't trade with.
Yeah, cabotage laws are not.
Yeah. The colonies, for example, couldn't trade with Jamaica or couldn't trade with something like that. They had to trade only with England.
Right. Yeah, every country has their own version of the Jones Act, so to speak. Yeah.
Yes, the Jones Act, which was passed in 1920, also called the Merchant Marine Act, and it's a disaster, and I don't know if it's.
So yeah, definitely the Jones Act is a contributing factor to Hawaii's cost of living. I'd say it's definitely in the top 10 of factors that are having an impact.
Yes. And because Hawaii has to import everything. I mean, you have to get the cars. I mean, there really isn't. I mean, you don't have any kind of manufacturing there at all, right? I mean,
right. And it's so easy for people to say, "Oh, because we have to import everything, that's why things are really expensive." But it's like, no, it's not. I mean, Hawaii will naturally be a little more expensive compared to other places because it's such a desirable place, right? So I don't think that's ever going to change. But but I think the number one cause is the backwards land use and zoning policies, because everything's tied to the land, right?
Yeah. Do you think anything will change after this disaster, or is it just going to be more of the same?
I'm not sure. The only glimmer of hope I see for Hawaii is that because the Democratic Party is so big, and this happens with any large political party, there's going to be a natural fissure, a crack in the dam, and you have all these factions within the Democratic Party, between the more progressive wing and the more conservative wing, right? And Hawaii is a very weird place where actually people are very socially conservative. So, when folks like AOC came down to Hawaii a few years ago, she came off very tone deaf, Like, we're not, when I say like the progressive wing of the Democratic Party here, we don't go far to the left, like in terms of tone. It's just a different place. And Hawaii is very unique in that sense. And I think there's such thing as the aloha spirit, which kind of mitigates us from going full on, communist, socialist, so to speak. But it's not this because the Democratic Party is so huge, you do have more, sensible Democrats, so to speak. As much as I'm not a fan of that term. So for our organization, we're appealing to those more sensible members of the Democratic Party, and there are people whom we could genuinely call allies on a couple of issues. If not, we'll never be able to agree on every single issue that we talk about, but we do have some natural allies in some issues, and I think for housing, people could see that there needs to be reform, that we can't just continue building in the same place, that we have to build out instead of just building up. And taxes are really expensive,
What are the relations like between the indigenous Hawaiians versus the descendants and people who, obviously aren't the non-indigenous?
Well, it's really hard to talk back, right? Because it's so easy for them to just play the race card and just label everyone else as a foreigner, as much as I think that term is very subjective, because nobody's a purebred Hawaiian anymore, right? So whenever there's a developer who's trying to develop something, it's really difficult to go against these protesters and these Native Hawaiian cultural protectors. It's really easy to capitulate because of that. So you have to appease the politicians, but you have to also appease these protesters. So it's a really, it goes beyond just the regulations.
Certainly it does. I mean, I just wonder who is what does the typical non-blue voter look like in Hawaii? Is he he's probably not a government worker. What demographic makes up the libertarian or makes up the red voter in Hawaii? I mean, there are so few of them.
Yeah, I'd say it's hard to distinguish between who votes blue and who votes red. I mean, there's a lot of people who vote Democrat, and they're very nice people, but they just vote Democrat because that's how their family have voted for many, many years. I mean, just to show how backwards the system is, a lot of people who are campaigning here, they often have three names: the first, middle, and last name. Like for the mainland, you only have two names, right? But they might have three names to hit all the check boxes, so to speak. So someone might have a Japanese first name, and then a typical white middle name, and then a very Hawaiian last name, right? That's a lot of times that's sufficient to win over voters. You're like, oh, he's a Hawaiian, he's a Japanese, right? But if you have a very, haole is the word for foreigners. If you're named like John Smith, then forget it, right? Although I guess our governor's name is Josh Green, and he came from Pennsylvania, so you might have a shot. But typically, like if you have a Japanese name, if you have a Hawaiian name, you wanna play that card.
Like Satoshi Nakamoto. Yes.
Yeah, I vote for him.
Yes. So yes. So what do you how do you think Hawaii ended up like this? Was it always this? What do you think? I mean, it sounds like it's always. I looking back through the presidential elections.
Oh, sure.
I did see Nixon winning in 72, and I also saw Nixon winning in 60, actually. But it looks like Hawaii's always been a socialist state. So.
I think, it goes back many, many decades. I think it goes back before statehood. when Hawaii was, had its roots in the sugarcane industry, where there are a couple of only a few big companies, running the show, so to speak. So from that point, we started having this very antagonistic relationship against corporations, and the we started embracing, the importance of unions, and I think that's kind of like what started everything. So we have a huge distrust for, big companies, huge distrust for companies, and huge trust for the unions, to provide for the common people. So I think it goes way back, and that's how it started.
Do you think that distrust for big companies goes back to the way that Hawaii was made into a territory in the first place? I mean, do you want to comment on the history of Hawaii and how Hawaii became,
Yeah,
became a
possibly.
U.S. territory and then became? I mean, it's definitely one of the more disgusting episodes in American history.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a more nuanced view. I think largely, well, Hawaiian history is very romanticized,
Yeah,
and as it is with any accounts of history, a lot of people, you know, romanticize the monarchy, and they weren't perfect. They weren't really good people. The the um, the last monarch, the Queen, she heavily idolized Queen Victoria of England, and she was a big spender of taxpayers' money. And her brother, who preceded her, was called the Merry Monarch because he loved to party.
that's true with a lot of monarchs,
And
unfortunately. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So I have a more nuanced view, but I think you are right that this distrust, this resentment towards foreigners, outsiders, might have started from way back during those times, during, when Hawaii was colonized.
I know Cleveland Grover Cleveland did not actually held it up, and he was not. He found out these people in Hawaii don't want to be part of the U.S. But then McKinley took over and says, "Yeah, we'll just take it and claim it now as a territory." And so it really, yeah, there's a lot, and there were cases where the companies who were stirring the pot, so to speak, and trying to spend money to try to take it over. It's something
Yeah,
it's a topic we could probably have a separate show on just by
yeah,
its.
I was never into Hawaiian history back in high school.
Yeah.
I thought it was, I, I honestly thought like Hawaiian history is too short and it's too insignificant. But there's a lot of stuff, and there's this really good book that I read, which, is so taboo to read, but it's got so much history because the person who wrote it was directly tied to, um, the the um, the the folks who were part of the transitional period during that time, and it's called, Hawaiian Sovereignty, I believe. Hawaiian Sovereignty,
Yes.
do the facts matter? And it was written by the gentleman who used to run the paper, the newspaper company here, and and one of the fascinating things is one of the fascinating doc pieces of document that he brings up is the is their version of the Declaration of Independence, you know as to why they wanted Hawaii to become a territory of the United States. And actually, you can't find it on Google. I because I saw a copy of the original, and I think it was just titled Proclamation, but it's been wiped out from history forever. I'm happy to send it to you later on, but it shows all the grievances against the Queen that they had. So yeah, it's very fascinating Hawaiian history. I don't, we can do a whole episode
Yeah.
about this, and
Yeah.
it's a lot more nuanced than
Well,
I
Hawaii had
because I
always
know what the typical libertarian position is, which is that, yeah,
well, Hawaii had basically been a stopover for ships, because it was maybe halfway, some you've been on the ocean for 3 months. You said you want to stop and maybe take a break, walk on the sand, before you go back to sea for 3 more months. Climb
Yeah,
some
and at some
trees,
point,
hunt, get
yeah,
supplies, hunt, get meat.
yeah, a lot of countries had an interest in Hawaii. I mean, at some point, it would have not been surprising if Hawaii would have been taken over by the British
Yeah,
or the Spanish people. There were a lot of competing interests.
the British, the Spanish, and maybe even the Japanese. It's very hard to say, of course.
I mean, yeah, the Japanese, right? Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure, for sure.
yeah. Since there's always been a Japanese, because I think I read somewhere that the closest country to Hawaii, I think, is Vanuatu or something like that. I mean, because obviously Hawaii is
Not
out there in
sure.
the middle of nowhere, but I mean, it's
Yeah,
such a long way from everything. I mean,
right.
it's I
But it
mean,
is a nice stopover, right?
yeah,
It's a nice
yeah.
place to refuel.
Oh yeah, yeah. In some cases, even too, when they first had planes couldn't even go across the Pacific. They might stop. They might fly to Hawaii and refuel in Hawaii. There's a lot of things there too. Places for boats, and of
Yeah,
course, it became a naval base, and of course, we could also,
got attacked.
yeah, and that's another thing we could do another show on if we could just do a show on Pearl Harbor, but uh,
Right.
which I do believe was allowed to happen on purpose, but that's another rabbit hole we could go down. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Right.
that was the first
We're
time
gonna
I was
cast for it.
introduced to conspiracy theories, and yes, it came from my high school teacher when I was a junior, Harold E. Vitale, rest his soul. But yeah,
Oh
yes,
really?
that was where I first learned about that. There was a possibility that yes, but anyway, yes. So Hawaii is a very interesting. So really, another thing I want to go into also is uh, Hawaii was quite possibly the worst state to be in when the big bad virus came around. Uh, I know some of the
Yes.
restrictions were absolutely insane. In fact, there were even restrictions about going from island to island. Can you tell
Yeah,
us about that?
it was quite ridiculous. I mean, we were one of the first ones to shut down and the very last ones to open up. Um, you know, Technically our constitution does have a emergency rule regarding emergency proclamations, but basically the governor, disregarded it, that it's not supposed to go over 60 days. And obviously, governors across the state, they just ignored it. But yeah, at, in the beginning, of course, there were a lot of fear. People were saying like, oh, there's going to be thousands of deaths. And every single day you saw the blaring cases, case counts, right? And then
Oh
that
yes,
always added fuel to extend the emergency, or even worsen it to make it more strict. But just how ridiculous it was like, for example, you're not allowed to sit on the beach, right? I mean, I always thought like you should go outside if you're sick. You should get some vitamin D, and we found out that to be the case. We should you
yes.
know be nourished naturally. But you're not allowed to lay down in the sand, but you could, if you're floating out in the water, you're safe. So a lot of people, they would just grab a noodle, or they would just float in the water and socialize with their friends. But when they got back to shore, they would immediately rush back to their cars and go home. Um, at one point, there was even a curfew. Luckily, that didn't go on for too long. But I remember that, for the longest time, like only quote unquote essential people were allowed to go outside, which I didn't really follow because, well, I kind of made myself into an essential worker by helping out my dad's restaurant at the time, because I
Yeah,
just had to go outside. But it was so strict, it was so backwards. They've also rescinded their transparency laws for some reason, So if you want to get data from the government, information from the government, file an open records request, you couldn't do that, you know, because of no reason. It just didn't make sense. But even after, when the whole nation was starting to open back up, Hawaii would always be, you know, we would always be lagging behind. I mean, there is this sentiment that because Hawaii does have a lot of elderly people, We do have a big aging population, so it was very hard to go against the narrative, right? Of it was really hard to
Oh
advocate for
goodness.
reopening because you would be blamed for wanting to kill grandma and grandpa, right? I'm sure it was
Oh
the same
yes.
case for Florida, but Hawaii especially.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've heard the same. I've heard the same thing about these retired Americans going down to Mexico and screaming about the same thing. Shut down the economy, and I mean, yeah. Oh gosh, I'm not surprised. And of course, they all want. They all want their benefits too. Yeah. They're. Don't get me this whole stuff about the younger people being socialists as horse manure. It's the people over 70 are the worst socialists. It's. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
that's a
Let's
good
try
point.
not to. Yeah. It's. Yeah, that's very interesting. Also, and to his credit, Mark Victor was actually one who sued on the mask mandates and got some of that stuff rescinded. But it was, but this had to
Yeah,
cost the tourism. I mean, the hotels had to be hurting. The the all the people who are dependent on Hawaiian tourism just had to be destroyed by this. I mean, less flights. I mean, Hawaiian Air. I mean, I'm sure it hurt Hawaiian Airlines and were any of them
yeah.
speaking up against this? I mean, the hotels or the hospitality industry at all?
Well, they got a lot of, you know, because they got a bunch
Yeah,
of the stimulus money, right? So I'm not sure just how
yeah,
much they've. Maybe they fared pretty well, but I think it's a lot of the small to medium sized businesses that got impacted, and some of the restaurants, that's been here for a long time, they never reopened, and you were never allowed to say it was because of COVID. That's a sad thing, right? You see on Facebook, like, oh, like a diner that's been here for many decades is now finally shuttering
yes,
its doors.
yeah, and
It's
there were
Nobody said it was because COVID locked them down. Yeah, unbelievable,
yes,
unbelievable,
or the
very
policies locked them
disgusting.
down.
You know, um, yeah, yeah, it should be pretty obvious that that the economy isn't just like a light switch that you flicker on and off. I mean, with
Yeah,
that said, I mean, I'm surprised by how resilient the economy has been. I mean, of course, the Feds have pumped trillions of dollars, but surprisingly, the economy has been pretty resilient. But there's been also a lot of damage. I mean, a lot of toll on kids. Untold tolls. And you're not allowed to say that we have to reopen. A lot of
there's
kids, yeah, they had to stay at home. Be they had to continue masking up for well over 2 years, I believe. And imagine just how
I
damage
wonder
that's
how
done to their development,
I wonder how
learning capacity.
I won't complain about the kids being kept out of the ignorance factories, but I wonder how kids are going to look back on this, and I hope they see it as something very ridiculous. That just the same way that Ayn Rand was impacted by watching the Bolshevik Revolution and the Russian Civil War. Uh, think
Yeah,
maybe libertarians should just give up on Hawaii and let it die, let it get worse, or because it doesn't seem like it's really any hope there, or what can be done. But because we do have,
well,
I know
I
some
wouldn't
great
be in this
libertarians who
business.
live in Hawaii,
Yeah,
but it doesn't seem like there's any.
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be in this business if. Yeah, I wouldn't be in this business if I weren't hopeful.
Yeah.
I really am. Um, Plus, it gives me fulfillment.
Oh
I think
yes.
it's the most fulfilling thing. One of the most fulfilling things you could do in your life to
Yeah.
spread the gospel of freedom and liberty. But I think there is a glimmer of hope. I mean, like I said before, people are kind of starting to understand that there's something screwy going on, that the status
Yes.
quo isn't working. I don't know if there's going to be an eventual break. What we're doing is just working within the fissures that we're starting to see, and just appealing to those people whom we could have a common ground with, right? So I'm not sure. Maybe it's going to take a really really big crisis for things to turn around. I'm not sure, but I think there are some cases to be hopeful for.
Yeah. Is there
Hopefully, I'm
any
selling
kind of
out.
an independent? Is there any kind of an independence movement there?
You mean like
Hawaiian
seceding?
independence movement. Yeah, or maybe even also, are there any kind of maybe any island independence movements, like any one of the islands wants to become its own state or something like that, or not? Hawaii is
No,
a nation,
no, yeah.
or yeah.
I mean, at
Okay, well,
least not significant.
yeah. So it sounds
Yeah,
like they're just pretty much
I don't
pretty
think
much
so.
content with being
It,
a vassal and the being
I
part of the
mean, you
feudal
see
system.
these you see these Hawaiians who want to you see these Hawaiians who want to reclaim their Hawaiian kingdom, right? But I'm not sure if that's all for the good intentions.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah,
It's certainly been an interesting conversation, Sean. You've inspired a few other
yeah,
topic ideas too that I might explore separately. I mean, I might talk about the annexation, and I might have some, and who knows, we might have somebody come on and talk about Pearl Harbor. But who knows? It's very good. But yeah, I've certainly
that's
enjoyed.
out of my expertise, but good luck with that. Yeah, but
Now,
thanks for having me on. This is really fun.
yeah, I read a book many years ago that was actually written in the 50s called "The Final Secret of Pearl Harbor."
Mhm.
By an admiral, a retired admiral named Theobald. Final Secret of Pearl Harbor. It's been in and out of print, but I like this book largely because it was written by a guy who was there. So I think he's a better source than anybody more recent. But obviously he's no longer alive. Yes, Final Secret of Pearl Harbor, Admiral Robert Theobald, published in 1954. It is available in paper. It is on.
Cool.
It's not cheap on. It probably looks like it's used copies again, but it's definitely. I think that's a good book. It's this was still fairly fresh after it happened, and it was really before conspiracy theories became fashionable. But maybe they were fashionable.
Yeah, send that link to me. I'll be interested in
Yeah,
checking it out.
yeah.
Yeah,
That and John F. Kennedy, I think, were what made conspiracy theories fashionable.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure,
Yes. Okay.
for
Well,
sure.
that is one book
All
I
right.
recommend. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sean. It's been good having you on here, and please like the video, subscribe, follow the channel, give it a thumbs up, and go check out my Substack and go get my novel Escape from the Village. I'm Chris Baker, and this is Sean Mitsui, and we're out. Thank you, Sean. Have a good day.